Welcome everyone to Join the Crowd, Expand Options for Learners with Crowded Learning. Our guest presenter today is Jeff Gumas of Crowded Learning. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. All right, so thank you for that introduction. And so, as Anne-Marie explained, Crowded Learning, we're actually only about 2 years old. We started in 2017, and that came out of 15 years in publishing, where I worked at various levels within educational publishing. My last 8 years were in adult education publishing at McGraw-Hill, and as with many people in adult education, I didn't necessarily seek out adult education, but I certainly fell in love with it once I started working in it. So this is, as Anne-Marie said, going to be a two-part series. So this first week of this overview of Crowded Learning is really going to help orient you to who Crowded Learning is and what we do, and give you some background in terms of some of the resources that currently exist on our website. We are going to just do a quick overview of Crowded Learning, the organization, how we started, and what we've been doing for 2 years, and then spending some time looking at the resources that currently are on the site, and then actually at the end talking about where you come in, because the name Crowded Learning is very intentional. It represents, the crowded part represents both a problem and a solution. The problem being that there's lots of great content out there, but it is a bit overcrowded, and it takes a lot of time and energy to sift through what's out there to find something that might be useful to you and to your students. On the solution side, we believe that one of the ways to overcome that is through something called crowdsourcing. You may have heard something called like crowdfunding, where there's some goal and everyone's donating money to a cause. That's called crowdfunding. Crowdsourcing is very similar, where you pull people together and say, hey, here's a thing that we want to pull together people's brains and their ideas into one place. And so our notion is, what if we do that with educational content and look at specific areas where there's a need for more content, particularly more interactive and online and mobile-friendly content, and get people involved in ways that we're sort of collaboratively working and bringing people's collective expertise together in one place. So I do want to start off with some questions, and so I'm going to, right out of the box, ask you, what free learning resources do you use with your students? And this could be content resources or instructional resources that actually have educational content, or it could be tools that you use to share content with learners or to develop your own content. It could be any one of the above, but what free learning resources do you use with your students?
Courtney says she uses Coursera a few times with her students, and Ashley says quizzes. Oh, we gotta love this one, Diane. She uses Newsela or Newsela and eslvideo.com. I don't know about that one.
I don't either.
Yeah, Khan Academy and Google Classroom. Wonderful. Doris says USA Learns, wonderful. Vocabulary.com. One of my favorites, Doris. Typing.com, and a few more. We did a Tech and Tell on Vocabulary.com a while ago. Actively Learn, another wonderful one. Okay, thanks everybody.
Awesome, those are great. So yeah, there's lots of really great resources out there, and I think obviously Texas is doing a great job in making people aware of those resources that are out there through Tech and Tell. What you'll see in a minute is one of the things that we first did was ask folks what are they using, because first things first, if there are too many things out there or just it's a little overwhelming, why don't we start by asking educators what are they using with their adult learners? And there were a couple in there that we mentioned that I actually haven't heard of. So it's one of my favorite questions to ask, because it helps me sort of know what's being used, and we can add it to our growing library of resources. So my second question then, in terms of one of the things that we really out of the gate started talking with educators about, is what best describes your curriculum. So I want you to read through these options before answering. But do you just use one publisher resource and maybe integrate other resources? A homegrown self-created curriculum? C, you primarily use one free or open online resource? Or D, I don't use any single resource. I pull together material from various sources. And the point of that that question in particular is to get at the point that, we know that adult educators, because there's such a lack of resources that are developed specifically for adult education, that everyone is sort of used to doing this, where you might have some curriculum that you've purchased from the publisher. You might have some of the resources that you indicated in the chat you're using. And we're used to pulling these things together because there's no single resource that works best for every learner. And oftentimes there's no single resource that provides enough for any learner. And as you guys are looking at Standards 2.0 now and starting to look at your curriculum and how well or not well it covers the new standards, what we often find is there's great lessons and activities that certainly align to a specific standard, but if you really read the standard and what it's asking for, it doesn't fully cover that standard. And so there is a need to bring in resources from multiple places. And so that's what we've sort of heard over and over again. And so Crowded Learning, as our mission, is really looking at raising the impact of adult education and workforce through that notion of crowdsourcing our collective knowledge and expertise. And so we really believe that if we collectively can curate some of these great resources and align them to the competencies that students need, we can just provide more options to instructors and, to me, more importantly, more options to learners. So you're going to hear me say the term open education resource a lot, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that next week, but just to sort of level set and give everyone the same sort of standard definition for vocabulary here, what is an open education resource? So Creative Commons is a licensing sort of body that is sort of the universal standard for indicating what kind of license a resource or website has, and it is the licensing that's used to indicate that a resource is open. And one of the things we will talk about in depth next week is that free is not the same thing as open. There's lots of free resources out there that you're able to use, but there's certain restrictions that you need to be aware of so that you're not using it in a way that violates the terms and conditions of that resource. And again, we'll get more into that next week. But Creative Commons, the way they define open refers to what are called the 5 R's. And for a resource to be open, it means that you're able to do all of these things with it. So the first R is retain. That means that you have the ability to download it. You can store it on your computer, on your drive. You can have your own sort of copy of it. That's sort of the first one. Reuse means that you can take it, and even if it's set in one place, you could reuse it in another place. You don't have to go specifically to a certain source to actually use it. Revising means that you actually have the ability to take something, download it or make a copy of it, and then modify it in a way that you see fit. So you might want to adjust questions, or you might want to adjust instructions, and you have the ability to do that. Remix means that you actually have the ability to integrate some of your own content in there, or pull content from various places and put them together in one. Say it might be an open text that you have the ability to download, and you want to insert a link to a video that enhances the learner's understanding because it's a little bit more media friendly and engaging. That's what remixing means. And then redistribute is the big one. Redistribute means you could do any of these things above, and then your copy of this sort of new version of open content, you have the ability to share it out with other people. And that's the big one that is really important. And when we're talking about some of these free resources that aren't openly licensed, that we do need to be careful of. So, as I said, the problem that we were sort of looking to solve when we started Crowded Learning is that there is a lot of content out there, but you as an educator are sort of stuck with the task of figuring out, is this content accurate? Is it current? Is it engaging for my learners? And is it aligned to the skills and the competencies that they need to learn? And that takes a lot of time and effort. And while there are great repositories of content out there, sifting through all that content is a very, very time-consuming task. And we heard that over and over again, and that's what's called overcrowding. And so these are the 4 main barriers to OER adoption. that we sort of heard over and over again as we talked with educators. Overcrowding is one, and this is a series of blogs on our Crowded Musings blog, and I'll talk about that momentarily. So this overcrowding notion was one. The second one is relevance. So, we look at the fact, someone mentioned Coursera actually, and that's a really great example. Open education really started taking off in higher education through sites like Coursera, where an entire course can be delivered online. It's made freely available. You might have heard the term MOOC, which is a massive open online course. Those became really popular in the early or mid 2000s because it was sort of democratizing access to learning. But oftentimes, it's a full course, and as we know in adult ed, you have different learners coming in at different levels with different end goals. You don't have the same students sitting in the same place for the same period of time, and a start-to-finish course isn't necessarily relevant to most learners. And so we saw a need to have a little bit more granularity in terms of how we organize all of these resources so it can be a little bit more skill-based and proficiency-based based on specific topics, concepts, and skills that the student needs to learn. Trust was another big one. So there are lots of things out there, but I always give the example of if you're looking for a recipe. If I wanted to cook a new mac and cheese recipe, and I go online, I just made it this week, so that's why it's fresh in my head, and I go online and there's one recipe that has 5 stars, but 3 people have rated it, and I see another recipe that has 4.7 stars, but 500 people have rated it, I'm probably going to go with the latter because more people have rated it really highly. I can probably guess that 5.0 with the 3 people that rated it were the person that created the recipe, and then he or she called 2 of their friends to say, hey, can you give it a 5.0 rating? And so trust is an important thing when we're looking at educational content because we want to make sure that it is quality content. And then the fourth one is mindset. And there really are sort of, it seems to be these 2 camps of folks where it's like the publishers don't know what to do with open education content. They're sort of threatened by it. And then folks in the open education world tend to think that the publishers are the enemy. But we know the reality is that there is a desire to have a sort of single curriculum resource that is sort of the spine of what you do. And so overcoming this sort of cultural these cultural differences between the two was a barrier to more widespread adoption. So having asked all those questions, having determined all of those things, the first thing that we went about doing was developing skill directories. So that same question I kicked off this webinar with, asking you what you used. We did surveys, I went to a lot of conferences and asked teachers, and we developed a set of skill directories in 12, well, started with 11 areas, and now we have 12 different areas. So there's a set of academic skill directories, there's a set of employability skill directories, and there's a set of 21st century skill directories that compile the things that we heard that educators are using with their students that are free and or open. And we're going to explore these actually momentarily. So then what we started sort of looking at was what are educators in states doing right now when it comes to curriculum. And we know that there's a lot of states, and I believe, Anne-Marie, if I'm not mistaken, that this is going to be a huge sort of initiative in Texas with your new standards, is looking to see that is our curriculum fully covering the standards.
It is a huge initiative. Yes, it is.
Yeah, and so back in 2014, Octave did what was called Standards and Action Training, and it sort of was this process where states look at their scope and sequence of their curriculum, or the curriculum resources that they're using, and then they review the resource to identify gaps between what is actually covered in the lesson or activity and what the standard is asking for. And then going through this process of finding or building resources to fill those gaps so that you were actually ensuring full standards coverage. And one example that we sort of came across as we were doing this was the state of Pennsylvania in 2014. They adopted a new curriculum. It was KET Fast Forward because they were shifting to the new GED in 2014. And this is a distance learning program. It's a fully distance learning program in Pennsylvania for their GED students. And their curriculum was essentially KET Fast Forward. That was the thing that they were leaning on as their resource. But then they did standards and action training and realized, well, when we're looking at the coverage of this resource to the standards, it doesn't fully cover everything. And this is one of the rating scales that's used in standards and action training, where for a particular resource in a standard, you look to see if it's a tight, partial, or weak alignment of the resource or the curriculum to the standards. So they went through the process of looking at the resource that they were using, looking at the standards and seeing what the alignment was, and then pulling together various resources and capturing it all in a spreadsheet where they were finding resources that filled these gaps or creating resources that filled these gaps, and then ultimately pulling those things together for full standards coverage. Well, that was a 3+ year process. And the thing about it is they're not unique in doing that. Like, they've done that with their curriculum. Other folks have done that with their curriculum. And so, you know, in various states, there's these spreadsheets probably sitting somewhere where people have found 5 or 6 great YouTube videos that teach ratios and proportions. But it's there and it's sitting on someone's computer. And so our notion is, well, what if we start actually asking people to sort of centralize that a little bit so that we know what resources, and so not everyone is having to go through the same process each and every time they're looking to figure out, well, how do we fill the gaps? And one of the other things that Pennsylvania did a nice job with once they did this work is, instead of having students go straight to their KET Fast Forward, which was their core anchor resource, they realized if we have all of these disparate things that we're going to have students do to actually provide this full coverage, we need to pull it together in one place. And so what you're looking at is their new Canvas. They use Canvas as their LMS, and what they've pulled together is, on a week-by-week, unit-by-unit basis, so every week is a unit, they list for the student, these are the publisher resources and the specific lessons that we want you to go to within our publisher, which they refer to as their anchor resources. And then here are additional resources that augment that and provide additional coverage and remediation in some cases for the skills that are covered. And so this is a process that's really intriguing in terms of bringing together those two things, that the one that we know lots of people are using is publisher resources, and then the ones that we know are out there and are quality but aren't getting really used that much because it's hard to figure out, what goes where. And so we started thinking about, how can we automate this process if we have all these scattered resources? And what we really need to start doing is thinking of a way to automate and sort of gather information about how do these resources align to specific skills. And if we're able to do that, then you as a teacher, that's not necessarily a curriculum, but it does allow you to say, these are all really solid resources that align to a specific skill or competency I need to teach my students. And I can put it into my sequence of instruction in whatever way I feel fits my teaching style and my learners' access and the things that we have available to our students. And so within that, also looking to provide user-friendly outputs. And so what we have started down the road of doing is gathering alignments of all of these resources. We have almost 300 publisher resource alignments to the College and Career Readiness standards, so that you can pick a standard and see specifically for what resources you have, what lessons and activities from those resources align to the specific standard. But then we're also doing that with these free and open educational resources. So this isn't curriculum per se, but it is pulling these things together in one place. And we're experimenting now with what are the outputs that we will provide so that you have sort of, in your hands a sort of comprehensive list of, and you pick a standard you want. These are the lessons and activities that align.
I just wanted to let everybody know that even though that Crowded Ed Learning was not aligned to Standards 2.0, the Common Core has many of the same types of standards, so you should be able to look at what this different curriculum is aligned to as far as the Common Core, and you should be able to find the standards very easily in Standards 2.0, because we did look when Texas developed the Texas Adult Education and Literacy Content Standards, or Standards 2.0, they did look at the Common Core. So you'll see a lot of similarity, okay? So I want to remind everybody of that. And if you're not familiar with a copy of the Standards 2.0, at the end, I'll show you where to download a copy from the website. So just keep that in mind, because whether it's the Common Core or Standards 2.0, there's a lot of similarity because it's ELA, it's math.
There's a lot of overlap in the domains, and that is one of the things that we'll look at is ideally down the road, we want to have an actual crosswalk where you can, select your standards and see. But right now there's actually two filters within. There's a college and career readiness standard listing, and then you could actually filter by TABE 1112. So if you just want specifically the standards that pertain to the TABE 1112 test.
Any plans for CASAS alignment since TABE is aligned? Are you thinking about doing?
Yeah, we're talking about that. Their level of alignment is tough to decode. I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah. So we're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So throughout this process, we've really been looking to see where do we fit into adult education and where can we be of the most value. And first and foremost, this is sort of intrinsic in our mission, is finding, promoting, organizing, enhancing these high-quality resources, and we do that in a number of ways. Helping educators distinguish between free versus open, just so we make sure that they're being legal in terms of what they're doing with them, is another thing that we've found a lot of importance and need. And then within that, also finding guidance for tech integration and true development of digital literacy. I'm not of the mindset that if you, and it's perfectly fine, if you've purchased a publisher online, program for GED prep or TABE prep or anything prep, that's great because it's one more thing that students have access to. But the notion of what digital literacy means in today's world is not go to this one thing, go to this lesson, and then consume the information. That's not really the active learning that we need for folks to be lifelong learners. And the fact of the matter is most of the information we consume and that we seek out is online. And so knowing the steps that one takes and knowing how to decipher and distinguish and evaluate information online is really important. And we think part of the value of pulling together different resources and exposing students to that is we can start sort of conditioning them to think of themselves as someone who has choice in what they learn and how they learn it, and thinking of ways to actually engage them in that process of thinking, hey, what is this resource? What can it do for me? And then as a sort of a tail end of that, did this resource work? Was it effective for me, and why? And we think that's an important set of questions to ask students because it conditions them to think about, as they need to answer a question or find out information, having some sort of strategic competence in how they go about doing that. And within that, we've been starting to do a lot of work around digital equity, inclusion, and accessibility for learners, and making sure that as educators, we're thinking specifically about not just, hey, we're going to use technology, but at the forefront going, okay, what is the reality of tech access of my students, of me, within my facility, and doing that at the front end so that we're actually providing digital integration that is accessible to all learners. So now we're going to look actually at the crowded learning resources. And so what we're going to be doing is diving into the website, and I'm going to be going back and forth between the slides here, but I'm going to start with our work, because this is a great place for you to explore some of the ideas that I just talked about in our blog, as well as current and past webinar recordings. We do have some recordings on more concept type things like tech integration and what does that look like in an adult ed classroom. We also feature a resource of the month on our blog that goes into a deep dive specifically about a particular resource, and we do tend to have a follow-up webinar that supports that as well. And then we also have our digital skills library within here. So Crowded Musings is our blog. It's a separate URL. The little graphic you see there is actually our current blog, which is a tool called Wakelet that we're really excited. And so it includes content resources and instructional tools. So if you remember, I asked the question at the start, what content or tools do you use? Most of our resources of the month have been content. Look, here's a great math resource, or here's a great reading resource. But we're starting actually this month to sort of alternate between both content resources and then resources that teachers can use to actually share that content out with students. And then we also have a bunch of articles on there discussing open education. So I'm going to go to the Crowded website right now. So this is the Crowded Learning website. It's crowdedlearning.org, and there's a bunch of different tabs here. So home is just obviously home, but if we go to our work, you'll see, just click on that. This is where our webinars are. Again, we just did a blog on this tool called Wakelet, and we do have a webinar on it coming up on Thursday the 24th, where you can register. So any of our current webinars you can register for, and then recordings for any of our past webinars are here as well. And then following that, these are links to all of our blog posts of our various resources of the month. So each one of these, this is from dating back to sort of when we started, 2017. These are all of the archives of those. And then we also have listings of some of our more recent projects. And then this is in particular one of that skill series. But the Digital Skills Library is where I want to direct you. So yeah, instead of having to sift through to get to that Digital Skills Library, we do have the link is, sorry, I just clicked, right there if you go to this menu under our work. And so this was something we developed because digital skills is obviously a really important set of skills for learners. And so we started pulling together resources from various sites into this one Digital Skills Library, with the intent that if folks like a particular resource, then by all means go to that. But if they're not sure of what's out there, this can give folks exposure to various different tools that are out there to develop digital skills. So it's broken into a student home and a teacher home. And the student home is divided into a set of different areas where if we look at something like computer basics, we've broken it into various sort of subtopics. And then for each of those subtopics, there's different options for learning that particular concept. So on the concept of understanding computer hardware, this pulls together something from digitallearn.org, which is a public library set of lessons. This one pulls from Wisconsin Technical Colleges, which has a full online course that's an actual course that you could download onto your own LMS. It is open. And then this is GCF Learn Free, which we know a lot of folks really, really enjoy and use quite extensively. And you'll see we've put in time amounts because the Wisconsin resource in particular takes a significant amount of more time, but it's pretty comprehensive in terms of what it covers. So for each of these basic concepts under computer basics, we break it down into sort of sub-skills, and then again, there's different options for learners specific to each of those areas. So as a learner, go through this, I might say, wow, I really like these Digital Learn modules, or I like GCF Learn Free. Back on the home page, we sort of have an explore area where if those sites are ones that they really, really like, again, by all means, go to it, because each one of these is a pretty comprehensive library of lessons. So it's part trying to organize resources, but part trying to expose people to resources. And if GCF Learn Free works great for you, then go to GCF Learn Free.
Are there sources for ESL? And maybe going back to where the skill repositories are, and can you answer that question?
I'll answer that when we get to the skill directories.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah. Doris. Okay, hold on.
Absolutely. So, but actually, along those lines, so we've got a bunch of different sites. I think somebody mentioned they use typing.com. So here's a number of other resources that provide free keyboarding practice for students, which obviously is important on the GED since the essay portion is typing only. There's mousing practice activities. And then to your question, Doris, about ESL resources, actually, Learning Chocolate is a really nice site that has sort of word banks. And we've actually pulled together the vocab sets from Learning Chocolate for all of the different topics that we have, because it goes a little crazy. We'll jump in there real quick. There's a lot of ads. It's kind of annoying, but I've seen this used in many classrooms, and all they do is just train the students to go click on this, and it's going to maximize your screen. And so no more ads. But what's really
Internet Explorer,
nice
Google
about
Chrome.
this is for all of these different topics, not just digital skills, they've got these audio tools that the student can hear the words, and then it's the same sequence of activities where this is a listening and reading activity.
Internet Explorer.
Where they match.
Internet Explorer.
And then they go into other ones. So this one has no audio. This is simply reading and matching for the second matching activity. The third one, there is no words. It's
Create a new tab.
strictly listening. And then the fourth one is fill in, where they actually have to really memorize it. And then the fifth one is a dictation where they hear it.
Address bar.
And they have to spell it in there. So it's kind of a really nice resource. It's specifically designed for folks learning English. And all of those, we pulled all of the technology-oriented ones into this vocabulary section here on the Digital Skills Library. I want to go back to the teacher side of this because there's a number of resources that are helpful on here. So many of you are familiar with North Star Digital Literacy Assessment. It is a set of free assessments, and if you are a site sponsor, you can issue certificates because there's a proctored version that you can administer. But all of these assessments on North Star are free, and actually if you use it, you may have noticed that the 4 categories that we have right now in the Digital Skills Library are aligned to 4 of the North Star assessment modules. But I participated actually in something last year called the Illinois Digital Learning Lab, and we observed that the English level of North Star is a little high for a lot of learners. And so we developed a few things as part of the lab. So for each of these areas, we have these observation checklists, which are Google Sheets that you can download. But this is a set of observation checklists so that you as a teacher could, instead of sort of having the student take a test, there might be specific tasks you want the student to do, and you could observe the student and sort of enter in whether or not they can do it on here. There's also an individual version of that form. So we developed those. We also developed a student self-assessment that is a Google form that, again, you could copy this and adjust it to be your own, but it allows you to ask students sort of their familiarity with any number of these various skills in different areas. So lots of different assessment options, including that Wisconsin open resource that has all of these assessments that are also free. And then we provide some sites that either are resources that can be navigated and explored by learners on their own. Obviously, it might require direction, pointing students to the particular resource or what they might want, but then they can explore on their own. There's a set of resources that are intended to be assigned or led by instructors, including something from your state library that has digital literacy training modules that include PowerPoints and lesson plans and activities and worksheets that go with them. So these are just a number of different resources that are out there that help teachers develop students' digital literacy. So that's the Digital Skills Library. In a very quick nutshell. So we can do a quick concept check because I showed it to you, so we'll see how fast you are. So if you're on Crowded Learning's website, if you can remember where the Digital Skills Library it is under Our Work. And I want you to tell me how many units there are in that Wisconsin Technical College Basic Computer Skills MOOC. So yeah, on the website, you go to Our Work. If you hover over it, I need to click back in here, you'll see the Digital Skills Library. And then you'll see it's actually under Student and Teacher Home, but we'll go to Student Home. And if you remember, one of the things that I had mentioned was that someone's quick, yep. Down at the bottom, if students want to go directly to a specific resource, they can do it here. So here's that Wisconsin online course. And if I go here, you're going to see that there are, in fact, 9 modules. You'll see this little thing called CC BY, which means it is Creative Commons licensed. But these are all of the modules on this course. And students can go here as a guest. They could actually create a login on here if they want. There's pre-tests for every one of the modules and post-tests for each set. And as you can see from the times, these are pretty extensive modules on every single one of these topics. So yeah, there's 9 different units in here. Great job, Claire. Thank you.
So you can see this incredible, everything's in one place, as Jeff was saying.
All right, so this is really one of the sort of meaty areas that will, this is sort of the most widely used set of resources right now is this Explore section, and this is where our skill directories reside. So I'm just going to hop back into the site because I don't need to really be in here. And I'm going to go back here. So under the Explore tab in the website, you'll see there's 4 different areas, and this is where we have pulled things that we hear teachers are using. The one that we've spent the most time on is by far the skill directory, because this is where we have been asking teachers over and over again, what are you using? So as I said, there's 12 skill directories. We've organized them into academic competencies, so reading, language, writing, math, science, social studies, workplace competencies, so communication, essential skills, and career pathways, and 21st century competencies, which is kind of an antiquated term in my mind because we are almost in 2020. So it's no longer new to be in this century, but digital literacy, financial literacy, health literacy, and the newest one is information literacy, because we see that as just a growing need as everything, content, information moves online. So each one of these directories, if we click on them, I'm going to go to meeting. We click on them, you will see that it opens up a PDF. It's pretty sort of simple. And you actually have the ability to, right up here on the left, if you want to make a copy of this and save it to your Google Drive, you click on this here. I'm not going to do it because it'll just bring me to my own version of this because I'm the owner of it. But this will allow you to actually take this and make a copy of it so that if you want to sort of add your own things in there or just cut this text and just have the list of resources, you can do whatever you want. But we've tried to organize these resources into sort of different categories depending on what exists within each subject area. So within reading, we see there's a lot of content libraries and reading libraries and curriculum out there. So this entire first page is all different libraries and curricula that are focused on reading skills. Here's vocabulary focused on reading skills. And then some resources that actually specifically dive into a particular skill, like the actual direct instruction of something like main idea in detail or summarizing. And so that's how each of these are organized. And again, we have them in 11 different areas. So I'm kind of going to answer the question that was the follow-up for this in doing so, but it gets at actually the question that was asked earlier in terms of what we have for ESL resources. First off, I have a very extensive list of ESL resources, and I just need to pull the trigger on organizing them and putting up a 13th directory, which will be our ESL directory on here. In the meantime, however, I will point you to the communication directory because that does have a number of ESL resources that we've found on there. And so actually, just so we can see how this does work, all of these are links, and these links link out to the specific resource. So within here, if I click on the listening room, and I just click that link, it's going to open up this website that has, in this case, all of these listening activities for ESL students. And so these are all specifically designed. These are listening activities to help sort of, and then comprehension related to the listening. Our friends in Canada have a lot of great ESL resources. They have a lot of great open education resources. And so there's a number of those that you're going to see when we do publish the ESL directory that are from Canada. So you might have little accents with little o's in there, but they do have a lot of great content. So those are the skill directories. And so this doesn't get at sort of that specific standards alignment that I was talking about, but it does at least sort of, for us, it was our first step in sort of winnowing down all of the things that are out there into the things that we are hearing educators are using with their adult learners in the classroom, and these are all free and open resources. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, although I just pointed you to here. So actually, go ahead and answer it anyway. So if you can name one of the ESL resources that is within the communication skill directory.
And while people are typing, Doris says, I can't wait for the 13th directory. Thanks for the direction to the communication directory. This is wonderful. That's what Doris said. I'm so glad, Doris. And then Diane talked about how you had mentioned one resource, and she said excellent for HEC and ESL. Everybody, while we're typing, I want to remind you, too, to go to financial literacy, the financial literacy section and the skills repository, because there are some wonderful resources there, too, with many things you can use in the classroom. So don't forget about the financial literacy. Okay, so Courtney says USA Learns, Adele's ESL Corner, that's 2.
Yep.
And
so yeah, we'll move on, but again, like I need to figure out what's the best way, because there are a lot of great ESL resources, and it may have a different format than these other directories, but I want to actually sort of break them down into, like, these are great for listening, these are great for speaking, so which ones lend themselves best to productive language, which ones lend themselves best to receptive language, which ones are leveled in a way that allows you to actually assign things specific to your students' levels.
Real quick, Jeff, another question. I just think I want to make sure. It says, can you share the Khan Academy sheet you created of time?
That is what we're going to do right now. So as I sort of started off, and the model that we're moving towards, what we want to do is take now some of these great sort of comprehensive resources that are out there and begin aligning them specifically to standards. And so you'll see a lot, you'll hear me talk a lot about the tool called SkillBlocks that we are building, that is basically a glorified database of really pulling all of these different resources into one place, taking the alignments that we have for each of them so that instructors can say, this is a resource I want to use, how does it align to a specific skill? So we're actually building an entirely new tool that will have its own URL. It will be skillblocks.org. In the meantime, we do have a tab on our page that as we're building it, we're providing all of those alignments to you. So if you go back to the Crowded Learning website, you'll see up top a tab called SkillBlocks. And this is what we're really going to dive into next week. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on here, but what you'll see is a few things. On this main page, there's an overview. There's actually a webinar where I walk through a lot of things, but we'll do some of that actually for the next part too.
Okay, Jeff, important question, because I think this will help everybody. You've got the skill directories that we just looked at the skill directories. So can you please give just a cursory overview of what's the difference between a skill directory and what SkillBlocks is going to look at? What's the difference?
Skill directories are just links to the resource, right? So go and explore Khan Academy. Go and explore USA Learns. It's more to sort of help people be aware of what's out there. With SkillBlocks, we're taking the ones that we know are the most trusted, we know are the most comprehensive, that we have alignments to the Common Core State standards and or the College and Career Readiness standards, and we're actually getting more granular. So instead of just pointing you to Khan Academy, we're saying, here's the Khan Academy lesson on this.
Okay. Next week, can you just create a slide that kind of gives a summary of that? Because I think
the entirety of next week is on that.
That's awesome. Okay, because I think, don't you agree, everybody, that will help clarify for teachers once they listen to this in the TD portal. Do you guys agree? Okay. Just a clarification, because for you, you know it like the back of your hand, but for others, they're not going to. So thank you.
No problem. So what we will dive into a little bit more next week, a lot more actually, is we have within SkillBlocks those 3 subject areas, and you'll see these are the resources that we're in the process of aligning to the College and Career Readiness standards and to Table 11 and 12. And you'll see for some of them it's just a link to the resource. But for others, you'll see there are actually these view alignments documents. And so if I click on one of these, what you will get to is an organized list of all of the resources from CK12. It indicates the College and Career Readiness level and the TABE level, the domain, the standard, and the emphasis on the test. And then these are direct links out to them. So if you are teaching math at level M, and you want something on the number system, so fractions and mixed numbers, I can click on this link, and it's going to bring me to the CK12 activity set. And CK12 is a great resource that includes readings and interactivities and a video and another activity and a practice set and a real-world application, all around this topic of fractions and mixed number applications. And so for the resources on the skill blocks page that you see this, you have alignments documents for that. So for example, Khan Academy, there's 2,000 plus practice sets that we've fully aligned to the College and Career Readiness Standards and to Table 11-12. Again, we're going to dive really deeply into that next week, but this is that notion of getting more granular now and saying this is a great free resource, and oh, by the way, if there's a specific thing that you are teaching, we have the link for you to the actual lesson, activity, or practice set or whatever from that resource that aligns to that skill. What Skill Blocks will be as a platform is actually pulling those together. So you'll see this is properties of two-dimensional figures. Here is the Khan Academy practice sets. Here is the CK12 resource sets. Here are the Common Core Sheets, downloadable PDFs that can provide additional practice for it. So you'll see all of those things all in one place once we build the platform, as opposed to these separate spreadsheets, which is what we have now, but these are proving to be really helpful to folks. And we will continue to publish them so that folks can take them and do whatever they want with them on their own with the individual spreadsheets. So that's going to be, particularly if you want to come back, I urge you to check out Skill Blocks, that page, excuse me. And for each one of those, you can go in, you can copy the spreadsheet, you can download it as an Excel sheet, you can download it as a PDF, and go around and look and see what resources are available that deal with a concept or a topic that I teach. These are the resources for which we currently do have alignments. So we have just one in language right now, there's a lot in math, and then there's a couple in reading. These aren't standard specific, but they are domain and level specific. So if you have learners at CCRS level B or TABE level E, excuse me, you'll be able to go directly to the readings that are appropriate for someone at that level. And in Common Lit, at least, we've organized them by the domain. So key idea and details, stories that are focused on that, or craft and structure, or integration of knowledge and ideas, which are the three main domains within reading, within the standards. And so I did want to finish with this, and we're going a little bit over, but this will be really quick, because this is just more of a, this is what we are looking as an organization to inspire. We have all these great resources at your fingertips. On our website, we actually do have an area under contact where there's a form that you can fill out to make a content suggestion. So if there's something that you don't see in one of our directories that you feel should be on there, and like Anne-Marie has mentioned things like Newsela to me and others, you can go on there and just quickly fill out the form and just say, hey, this is a great resource, we think it should be included. So that is one of the ways that I continue to learn about what's out there and be able to, again, to share it out with everybody else in a bit more organized manner, which is what we're all about. And then there's also volunteering to help. So this is something we really haven't done much with yet. It's where we're looking to go, where we want to inspire folks to take these resources and share what they're doing with them in various ways. So right now we're in the midst of actually a 10-week links event that's focused on reading and writing resources. We're sort of smack dab in the middle right now, where if you're on links, we're talking about some great fluency resources, and so each one of these areas, we're looking and spending a week exploring the resources, and then having teachers share amongst one another how they're actually using those resources with their students. Even though we're past comprehension, all of those feeds are still in there. There's videos that are available for each one of these things, which actually provide sort of a quick overview of the resources. So this is something that you could jump into at any time right now and sort of join a community of practice of people talking about these various resources and how they're using it. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is we're going to be starting a crowdsourcing event. This is a resource we're focusing on right now in that Links event called Reading Skills for Today's Adults. It's 350 readings at sort of the lower levels of Lexile, and it's designed to practice fluency. So there's recordings of each of the readings at 3 different speeds. What we're going to plan on doing is finding and inviting teachers to participate in developing Quizlet decks or Google Forms. We're going to provide trainings in both of these tools so that for each of these stories, in addition to the actual reading, we are going to create as a collective group vocabulary decks using Quizlet of the vocabulary words that are part of the story and comprehension quizzes using Google Forms of the comprehension questions that already exist for this story, and combining them into one so that instead of just being a fluency resource, we can package these together so you're actually hitting 3 of the 4 components of evidence-based reading instruction. There's vocabulary practice, there's comprehension practice, and there's fluency practice, because we as a collective group will be building out those other 2 areas. So I know we've gone over, and so I'm going to stay to see if there are any questions. Sure, yeah, there is one question that I see. In terms of the crowdsourcing event, we haven't announced it yet, but we will be announcing it on Links as well as through all sorts of other channels. So you will certainly see that when it comes out. Yeah, I don't have any parting thoughts, but definitely go and explore. I hope you can join for week 2 because we really will do a deep dive into those different resources and look at how to actually integrate them in a way that is meaningful for your students and isn't too much of a burden on you as the time-strapped instructor. So thank you all for taking time out of your day.
Take care, everybody. Until next time.